Welcome to Council Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield.
Welcome to Council Culture, the Business of Law podcast from Byfield. Olivia, our regular host, is sunning herself up. She's gone back home to Scotland for a week. So I'm Ben Girdlestone, Joint Managing Director at Byfield, and I'm your host for today. A bit of a disclaimer. We had our annual summer party last night at Smiths of Smithfield, which was a great night. I think quite a few of our listeners will have been there. So if we sound slightly subdued, you'll know why. So slightly delicate head and hay fever, but hopefully that won't put you off. But I am really pleased to be joined by one of Byfield's newest recruits today, Account Director Eleanor. Hi El, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Apart from the aforementioned effects of last night, I'm actually pretty good. Enjoying the hot weather. Business is good. There's a we've got a lot of new people at Byfield, a lot of new briefs coming in. From a time where things felt slightly precarious with Trump and everything else of a few months ago. I think that the mood music feels pretty good, and actually chatting to clients and other friends at the party last night, people seemed in really good spirits. So it was it was, as well as being a good night, it felt pretty positive. I think before we start, it's worth just introducing our listeners to you, El. You have had an interesting journey to us. You came to us from CBRE, which, as everyone will know, is a big property company, but your background is as a trained lawyer, but also you worked in-house in comms at a couple of law firms. So do you want to say hello to our listeners and introduce yourself a bit?
Yes. Hello, everyone. So I've been at Byfield for, I think, 6 weeks now. The time has absolutely flown by. But I actually started out as a trained lawyer back in Australia. So I didn't really know what I quite wanted to do with my law degree. I got a graduate job at a sort of boutique commercial firm. I worked there for about 18 months, but I sort of knew quite early on it wasn't quite for me. I really enjoy working in law, but I didn't enjoy practicing law. So when I moved over to London, I thought it was sort of an opportunity to have a little bit of a career shift. And that's when I sort of got my first sort of in-house comms role. And at the time, I think the world of legal PR was brand new to me. I just didn't really know that these types of roles even existed. So it sort of really expanded my horizons there. So I got a job at RPC in the comms team. I was there for a couple of years, which I absolutely loved. I moved to Clyde & Co. I was working there in a global comms role. And then I actually moved out of law for a couple of years. So I worked for an insurance broker for 2 years. And then I was most recently at CBRE, the property company. And I think actually that experience has made me realize I wanted to move back into the legal sector. So I'm happy to be back working in law again.
So I think what's interesting, a couple of things that, as all our listeners will know, the legal sector is a wonderful and slightly weird place. But there are a couple of industries, aren't there, certainly from a press perspective, which have some similarities, and property is definitely one, and I think insurance is the other. So I guess before we start whizzing through this week's stories, question for you really. So in the 3 years that you've been out of legal, now you've come back, what feels different and what feels the same?
What feels the same, I think, is it's a very small, very close-knit community and everyone knows everyone. And I think news travels incredibly fast. I think especially around those sort of human-focused stories, partner moves, lateral hires, that those sorts of news stories travel like wildfire. So I think that has definitely stayed the same. I think a difference I've noticed is I think a lot of publications are moving more towards that sort of data-driven reporting. I think in terms of analysing firms' performance and firms' market share, I think there's been a real shift towards that sort of reporting. I think publications like The Lawyer and Legal Business have been doing that for a long time, but I've seen more of an increase in that type of reporting sort of across the board. So I think that's a change. And I think as well, definitely a greater scrutiny on firms' cultures, DEI policies, and pay transparency. I've noticed as well. I think there's much greater scrutiny now.
Okay, that is interesting, and I think I fully agree with you on the data point. I mean, for 20 years or so, the big legal titles have done top 50s, top hundreds, etc., etc. But they really are slicing and dicing the market now in very different ways. If you take, the lawyers' global elite, just by way of example, there's a lot of subjectivity into some of the analysis as well, which I really like.
Yes.
I really like. I think it's good. Good. Well, look, we're delighted to have you both at Byfield and today on our podcast. You've picked out a couple of stories, haven't you, that you want to talk about? So I think the first one involves graduates and graduate recruitment. So over to you.
Yeah, so this has been covered quite widely in the press this week that UK graduates are facing the worst job market since 2018. So a couple of reasons for this, I think, sort of higher taxes for employers, changes to minimum wage, but then of course we have AI and the impact that's sort of having on these sort of entry-level positions. And I think it's a really challenging time for graduates at the moment. I read last year that I think that there were over 1 million applications for about 17,000 graduate vacancies. So there's just such a disparity between the roles available and the amount of graduates there are. And I think we're at the tip of the iceberg of seeing the impact of AI on these types of roles as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I think it's quite a tough time for grads at the moment. And I think actually we've seen quite a big increase in professional services firms introducing apprenticeships. So that's something that's been rolled out really widely across property and insurance, as well as in legal. So we're seeing sort of the solicitor apprenticeships, we're seeing business services apprenticeships. So I think graduates now are not only competing with other graduates, they're competing with apprentices who've actually had on-the-job training and a degree through their roles. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. And I think the value people are actually going to place on university degrees now. I think there was a time when if you got a good university degree, you were, guaranteed a good job straight out of university. And I think that is changing now.
Yeah, I acknowledge all your points. I have a slightly different take because I'm older. When I started work, actually, there was weird similarities. It was a tough jobs market right at the end of the 90s, and the business was just starting to use the internet. The internet had been in existence for some time before that, and everybody thought, in a tough jobs market, the internet is going to take graduate jobs and actually exacerbate that situation, and it didn't happen.
Yes.
It was kind of fine, right? It worked itself out. And I feel quite similarly about AI. We had a really good training session internally yesterday, didn't we? And
Yes.
it does still take, intelligent human beings to use AI effectively, doesn't it? And I really don't see that changing in the same way it was back in my day with the, with the internet. You had to be able to use it. So I started off in agency and I used to do lots of actually kind of ONS research-based PR. The type of thing that you see all the time, the equivalent in those days of freedom of information requests using ONS data and things. And, it took a bit of creativity on my part and all that sort of stuff to do that work and to do a good job. And I think it's the same in the legal sector. I remember when I was at Saltram May, we, as everybody knows, a very early adopter of due diligence, AI software. And there was a whole kind of thing that, the robots are coming for the lawyers' jobs and all that sort of stuff. That never happened. They still hire the same amount of trainees as they ever did. So I'm really more kind of glass half full, I think, on this, just because I've some experience. But I do think there is some nervousness around hiring, despite what I said at the top of the podcast about general feeling of kind of cautious optimism. The jobs market always lags behind the economic reality a little bit by a few months. And if you rewind back to the spring, it was really precarious, wasn't it, with Trump and his agenda? And this is going to be a Trump-free zone today, by the way. I know the last few podcasts I've been on, it's almost been exclusively about Trump executive orders, etc. We're just not going to go there today. But I do think that some of the stuff that you've raised in this piece, and it wasn't a legal piece, was it? It was a general piece in the FT.
Yes.
Is a bit of a result of a very precarious time of a few months ago. And I would hope that, obviously we're going into the summer period, but as we move into the autumn, things will pick up a bit.
And I think there can be sort of a bit of fear mongering among the press as well about AI coming in and taking all these jobs, which won't really happen in reality as well. And it will create more jobs in those industries. So I think graduates who are tech savvy and are learning this technology will have a huge advantage as well when looking for a job.
100%. And, you know, as we looked at yesterday, lazy use of AI,
Mm.
i.e. getting it to do your thinking for you, just will not wash. It's just
No.
very obvious when you see something that's been generated by somebody who's done that, as opposed to somebody who's actually, you know, interrogated AI in a way. And you know, as I feel quite strongly, you know, the ability to use AI in a thoughtful, intellectual, and a curious way is an asset and a skill in and of itself, which is, you know, sellable.
Yes, definitely. And I think if firms don't adapt to it, they're going to be left behind very, very quickly as well.
Yeah, agreed,
Yeah.
agreed. Good. Do you want to take us on to your next story that you've picked out? Something which has been pretty much top of the agenda in the from a legal perspective in the FT this week.
Yeah, so seeing the increasing move to non-equity partnership models. So I think 87 of the 100 largest law firms now have salaried partners. So I think this is allowing sort of younger or potentially sort of lower billing partners to be sort of paid a salary while still holding the partner title and the prestige of that. So it'll be interesting to see those remaining 13 firms, whether they really stayed committed to that all equity partnership or whether that changes over time. I think a lot of firms are moving to the salary partners just to sort of remain competitive in the marketplace. So I know the chair of Paul Weiss said that that's why they made that change last year, just to simply remain competitive. And I think, you know, in terms of getting lawyers from sort of rivals and competitors, it's really a way of being able to attract that talent.
Yeah, I agree with that. Kirkland's model has been like that for a long time, where they will hire senior associates from, you know, I think guess US competitors and sort of badge them as partners, but keep them on a salary. I always have kind of mixed feelings about this. A couple of points I'll make. Yes, it's very, very newsworthy at the moment, but firms have always had, you know, significant amounts of salary partners. I remember, I think when the DLA Piper merger happened, God knows what year that was, but DLA had a significant number of partners who were, you know, salaried. It's always been the case. I mean, I come from my old place at Slaughters of the purest partnership I think there is. Not only is it all equity, but it's not even an LLP. So I think I have slight, uh, you know, fond memories of that. And I kind of question when you become, and I think that the FT touched on this certainly in the full disclosure email this morning. If you do become a salaried partner, is it a stepping stone or is it a destination? And I'm not sure if you take the usual kind of classic partnership track of PQE. It's very, very transparent, isn't it? You're 6-7 years PQE, and then you're a partner. But when you become a salaried partner, the moves to equity, it's not that transparent unless it's internal, I think, is it? And I do, you know, question whether it's a sort of, you know, becoming a salaried partner is, you know, it gives you a bit of a badge of honor, but that's your that's your limit. I'm not sure. And
Yeah, I guess, yeah,
I wonder
whether
how
it's
you,
sort of another, oh, sorry.
yeah, no, go on. I know.
I was going to say whether, you know, is it another rung in the ladder to move up to equity partnership, or is it a sort of different career destination that people sort of get to salary partner and then they stay there? I'm not
Yeah.
quite sure.
And that's my point. And, you know, in many firms, rather than do this, or some firms, they may have non-equity partners, but they have like off counsel and all that sort of stuff. So it's very clear that somebody is probably a brilliant lawyer, but doesn't really either want to or is equipped to be a partner with everything that everything that entails. And again, kind of linking to the graduate story, slightly tenuously, sorry, but people just have different expectations and desires for themselves now, don't they? You know, if I rewind back to when I first came into the legal sector in the early 2000s, it was partnership and everyone was going for it, and you got it or you didn't. And now I think, and I like this, that people, you know, quite early in their career say, well, do you know what? I love being a lawyer, but I don't really want to be a partner with everything that entails. And I think that's perfectly acceptable now. So you sort of question, about what the motivation for having a band of salaried partners is. Is it because you want to put somebody that's called a partner in front of a client, which is a reasonable thing to do, or is it just optics around partnership numbers and partnership track and things? I'm not really sure what the answer is, but certainly if we rewound to the aforementioned 20 years, I would have seen a lot more sense in this trend than I do now, because people have a slightly more relaxed and a slightly more relaxed view to their careers. It's not necessarily as linear as people would say. So I kind of, even though this Kirkland story was massive and things in the FT today, I did kind of feel like it wasn't quite as newsworthy as perhaps all that coverage suggested, but perhaps that's just me. I don't know what you think.
No, I do agree, because I think we've seen this playing out quite consistently over the last couple of years. It's not really like a new trend. But I think to your earlier point as well, I think that these sort of alternative career paths really appeal to the younger generation, sort of Gen Z and Gen Alpha, who really value work-life balance and flexibility above, potentially titles, which is sort of different from older generations. So I think that it's sort of providing an alternative career path for people who value those things more than other people. So I think it'll appeal to those younger generations.
Yeah, 100% agree. Good. I've picked out a couple of things I think are interesting this week. Very, very similar stories in as much as it's around US professional services, building scale in London, but two very different things. So I want to start with Alvarez and Marsal, who are, I think most of our listeners will know them, but they are a big, heritage, big restructuring firm based out of New York, probably most famous for running the global liquidation of Lehman Brothers, which I think if you're in that industry is probably the biggest thing that you can possibly do. But they've launched a UK flexible lawyer arm this week, and that's after creating Broadfield, which is I think it's hard to know quite how to describe that, but it's a sort of pan-European network of firms, of which BDV Pitmans is the UK partner, but really, really innovative approach to tackling the legal sector. So I've worked a bit actually with A&M in the past, and certainly a huge amount of that part of their model was big referrals from law firms in terms of restructuring briefs, etc. But they're now, starting to challenge the status quo. And they're very, very vocal about that. And there's an interesting juxtaposition, isn't there? We do talk about this quite a lot on the podcast about how well the big four are doing penetrating the legal sector. And usually the answer is not very. They've been trying to in different ways for many, many years. But it seems that A&M in particular are actually doing a really good job in doing that. The whole kind of, flexible lawyer model has been around for a while, hasn't it? With lawyers on demand, etc. But it's really interesting how a non-legal heritage professional services firm can tackle the same thing as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I wonder whether it'll sort of compel other firms to reevaluate their structure or not. What sort of the knock-on effect will be on the market.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a story in the Sunday Times, wasn't there, a couple of months ago that A&M, Alvarez and Marsal were looking to float. I'm not quite sure how true that is, but if it was, it would be a super interesting ownership model, wouldn't it, when you've got this type of thing as well. And it's interesting, isn't it? It's quite, if you look at our our legal media, and in fact many of our world, we are in a bit of a bubble, with the magic circle and the big US firms and all that sort of stuff. And it's always really good to see things like this and to realize again and again that, gosh, the sector is really structured in a way which is open to innovation, isn't it? If if you've got the right kind of a approach.
Oh yeah, definitely. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out over the coming years, whether other firms will be rolling out sort of similar offerings.
Yeah, I think we'll see. And I want to see what the big four do as well.
Yes.
Right, so our final story today, again, is linked, and it's again in financial news. James Booth has broken a couple of good stories this week. The A&M one was the first one, and the second was one from yesterday. US law firm, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, but Michelman and Robinson launched in London. They're an LA-based firm. Another one I hadn't heard of, and I don't think many of us have, which again tells us that there are so many firms of massive scale in the US looking to do stuff in London, which I think is really, really cool. And they've launched in Hampstead, which I thoroughly approve of. What a nice place to have an office. And again, I'm minded of the launch of Perkins Coie, who launched, I think, in May last year. To some good coverage again, I think in financial news, and they've obviously been in the headlines with the Trump executive order. But again, you are reminded that beyond the bubble of the big white shoe New York firms, there is a real whole world of very, very interesting firms in the US looking to do things here. Again, good to see, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's sort of continuing to put pressure on the Magic Circle and Silver Circle firms, definitely. I think we've seen sort of an influx of US firms setting up shop in London. And I think they're offering sort of the New York level compensation in the UK. So I think we're seeing UK-based firms having to sort of continue to increase their NQ salary to sort of remain competitive. It'll be interesting to see whether that continues.
Yeah, it will. And it definitely will. I think some firms have already come out and said, no, we're not upping our rates. We'll talk about this quite a lot, don't we? But, you can't keep upping NQ rates and not really upping the rest of it very much, because you just end up with a crunch in the middle, don't you?
Yes.
But I'm interested in Michelman and Robinson, not just because they decided to open in Hampstead and not in Bishopsgate with every other US firm. But they have a really interesting model and client base, etc. So let's see what they do. And again, hat tip and kudos to James for breaking a couple of quite cool stories, I think, this week. So I think that brings us broadly to the end. Olivia will be back, I think, the week after next week, with a couple of special guests. We've got a litigation podcast with Gus and Dina coming as well, so look out for that. So how's it been? Have you enjoyed your first appearance? I hope it's not your last.
Yes, it's been great. Easier than I thought the day after the summer party, actually. It hasn't been too bad at all.
I think you've done very well, and I hope the positivity but slight weariness in certainly my delivery hasn't put everybody off too much. I think this goes out on Friday when everyone will have had a good night's sleep. So to all our listeners, have a good weekend, enjoy the sunshine, and see you on the other side.
You've been listening to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and join us again next week, where we'll be discussing some more of the biggest stories in the legal sector.